Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to episode number 2 in our comprehensive sentence correction series. Going to cover absolutely everything you need for sentence correction on the GMAT or the executive assessment in this series. Video number 2, we're going to start with something pretty basic here, pronouns, and we're going to have 2 different videos on pronouns. Today, we're just going to talk about the basics. So the most common pronouns you're going to see it and they and derivatives of them. So it's, their, them. Every once in a while, you'll see a he or a she or a his or a hers on the GMAT or the executive assessment, but not super common. You can have another video that covers demonstrative pronouns. If you don't know what that means, no problem at all. Jargon is not important on the GMAT, but it's that and those when they're used as a pronoun. That'll be in a separate video. So 3 parts to today's video. Part 1, we're going to talk about the basics that you absolutely must know. So the things that are going to really build efficiency for you. You need to have these pronouns jumping off the page at you. And I'm going to talk about the absolute minimum you need to be able to do to master pronouns on the GMAT. Second part, we're going to talk about pronoun ambiguity, which is one of those things that people look at and go, oh, that's a rule. It's not an absolute rule. Unfortunately, there are very few absolute grammar rules that always apply on sentence correction. But ambiguity is something that shows up quite a lot. We're going to get into that in some detail and talk about the nuances of it, and also make quick mention of a few other things that people want to believe are rules when it comes to pronouns on the GMAT, but unfortunately are not absolute rules. Part 3, we're going to go over some full examples, 2 official full questions. Pretty moderate difficulty, maybe a little bit harder than average, but not super difficult. So you can kind of see it in action mixed into a broader question. All right, with that, part 1. So biggest thing we want you to be able to do when it comes to pronouns on the GMAT, when you see any of these guys, and again, you're most often going to see it or they or their derivatives, so it's or them or their. We need these to jump off the page at you. And the first thing you need to think is there something nearby that it could refer back to? So if you see an it or an its, you need to go looking for a singular noun, period, and see if it makes sense in the context. And if you see a they or a them or a there, you need to go looking for a plural noun that it could be referring back to and see if it makes sense. If there's something in the vicinity that does make sense, you're probably okay. So first example here, every time I order a salad at Panera Bread, they offer me a free cookie, and I like cookies. By the way, if any of you work for Panera Bread, we do accept sponsorships in the form of oatmeal raisin with berries. So this word they needs to jump off the page at you here. And whenever you see it on a GMAT or executive assessment sentence correction, you need to think, hey, where's my plural? Now, obvious example here, there is no plural. We speak like this in real life. Certainly native speakers do. We'll use the word they to kind of refer to the people at Panera Bread. But there are no people mentioned, no plural nouns at all. So this is definitely wrong without a doubt. You have no plurals to refer back to when you see that pronoun they. Obviously wrong. What about the second one? Again, that they should jump out at you and you should think, okay, where are my plural nouns? I've only got one, horses. Are the horses offering me a free cookie? Those would be very nice horses, but I've never had that happen to me. Also wrong. So sure, there's a plural that they could refer back to, but it's absolute nonsense. Now, this is where you get the quick eliminations. So when you see an it, a they, or any derivative of those, or he or she, which again are far less common on the GMAT, need you to say, okay, is there something you can refer back to? Does it make sense? If there's either no referent that's possible or no referent that makes any sense, you know you've got an error on your hands. The faster you can find these kinds of errors, the better off you're going to be in the long run. Now from here, things get a little bit more nuanced. So I'm going to do next, I'm going to give you an example that illustrates kind of this basic concept a little bit. And then we're going to get into some things that are a little bit fuzzier, get into some pronoun ambiguity, which we want to believe is an absolute rule. But unfortunately on the GMAT, like so many things, it is not an absolute rule. So I'll give you a quick example. It's a stylized version of an official question. We shortened it up a little bit just to make it quick. Give you about a minute to go through this one. And then we'll come on back. All right, if you need another minute, feel free to hit the pause button. Okay, so hopefully you watched our first video, which is kind of an introduction to the overall approach you should employ with sentence correction. And briefly, I'm going to talk about that just a little bit here. The worst thing you can do is, instead of reacting to the thing that can get to the clean elimination, you should see the there and react to it. Obviously, you're doing that if you're watching this video. I primed you to think about it. Sometimes people will look at a question like this and go, wow, C's a big mess. Look at all those words. The tracks that dinosaurs left show that they walked with their feet directly into their bodies. Why would I say all that when I could say something that's more succinct? Bad way to think. So there's nothing wrong with it being longer if that's what gives you a clearer and more logical sentence on the GMAT or the executive assessment. So I don't want you worrying about wordiness right off the bat. I don't want you worrying about what sounds awkward. I want you thinking, hey, where's my low-hanging fruit? I see pronouns here. Let me react to those. It's either going to get me a quick elimination or it isn't. And if it does, great, I can be out of this question really, really quickly. Now, obviously, we strip this down to just 3 answer choices and shorten the sentence up a little bit, but it'll give you an idea. So we've got the word there appearing twice. So my job is to say, where's my plural? Well, it's tracks. It's my only plural. No other options there. So dinosaur tracks, dinosaur is singular, tracks are plural. Dinosaur tracks show the tracks walking with the tracks feet directly under the tracks bodies. That's pretty weird. I don't think dinosaur tracks have bodies. I don't think dinosaur tracks walk. A is completely illogical. Yeah, sure. You know what they're trying to say. You know that they're trying to say dinosaurs, but you've got to be literal with sentence correction. This is unambiguously absolutely wrong. There's absolutely no reasonable referent for them there or there. B, same exact story. A little bit of a different construction, but same idea. They walked. What's walking? There's no plural dinosaurs here, dinosaur singular. The tracks are walking with the tracks feet directly under the tracks bodies. Same nonsense. Hope you like C. The tracks that dinosaurs left, well, that's awkward, but who cares? Show that they walked. Great, dinosaurs. With their feet, still dinosaurs. Directly under their bodies, still dinosaurs, no problem. Now, what a lot of people think when they see this is, hey, isn't that ambiguous? And when people say ambiguous in the context of pronouns, what they mean is we have the word they or their, some other pronoun, and in this case, plural pronouns, and there's 2 different plural nouns that they and their could refer back to. How do we know that it's dinosaurs and not tracks? Well, a couple things here. One is you've got to ask yourself, is this really creating any problems for me? Does this make the meaning muddy in some way? Does it create a problematic sentence? And I think the argument here is, well, no, they and their, the most recent plural, is going to be dinosaurs. Really nothing unclear there. Now, if you don't really believe me on that and go, well, yeah, but sometimes it refers to one further back, and isn't that a problem? Okay. Well, the way I want you to think about it is ambiguity is not an absolute rule on the GMAT. Should you pay attention to it? Sure, it can matter. It can be a deciding factor, but I don't want you to look at something like C in a vacuum and say automatically wrong because of ambiguity. Now, if we have an almost identical answer choice to C that gets rid of that ambiguity, sure, you might argue that that other answer choice with no ambiguity and everything else the same would be better. But your job on sentence correction is always to find the best of the 5 answers, not to find one that's absolutely perfect in a vacuum. And huge word of caution, you're going to see plenty of pronoun ambiguity in correct answers. You're going to see some pronoun ambiguity in wrong answers. I just want you to be really careful and say, first pass through when I look at this, is there something in the vicinity that they and their can refer back to? In this case, dinosaurs. Does it seem reasonable? Sure. I'm going to move on to other issues. And if I have to at the end, maybe I use ambiguity as a tiebreaker, but it's never going to be more than that. All right. Let's give you another couple examples real quick here. Again, stylized examples, shortened versions of official questions. Go ahead and take a moment on this one. All right. Nice, short, sweet question. 2 answer choices just to illustrate what's going on. So hopefully your eyes jump straight to the they in answer choice A. And again, your job whenever you say pronoun is to say, what can it refer back to? I've got a plural pronoun. Where are my plurals? Well, I've got buds, I've got needles, and I've got types of pine tree. So you could look at this and really easily conclude, hey, that's a problem. That's ambiguous. So does they refer to the buds? I guess that makes sense. Consequently, the buds are able to withstand forest fires relatively well. Or does it refer to needles? The needles are able to withstand the forest fires relatively well? Not sure we're saying that. Are we saying the types of pine tree are able to withstand the forest fires relatively well? Maybe it's all three. Who knows? Is that confusing? Maybe we could argue that it's ambiguous. Do I know exactly what it refers to? Seems like it's the buds. That's the most recent one. But you could overreact and go, that's a problem. Now, notice that answer choice B takes care of that. There is no pronoun. So the trees are able to withstand forest fires relatively well. Absolutely no ambiguity. We know that it's the trees that withstand the forest fires well. Here, not clear. Now, how much of a problem is that? Well, you could say that that's the tiebreaker, except that it's not. There's one other huge difference here. Protect versus protects. We've got a huge subject-verb error here. So a thick layer of needles protect. So layer is the subject here. Of needles is just modifying the thick layer. A thick layer protect, singular, plural. It protect the buds. This is absolutely wrong. We've got a huge error here. So B is out, and A, you've got to accept it, given the choice between these two. Because, yeah, arguably a slightly ambiguous pronoun. Yep. But that's not a huge problem. Does it fundamentally make the sentence impossible to understand? No, we can live with it. The bigger error here is the subject verb. Here's my point. Pronoun ambiguity. Does it matter sometimes? Absolutely. Should you notice it? Always. But be careful. Don't overreact because it can be trumped by a more severe error. Little bit of lack of clarity here in A, but a fundamental massive grammar error in B. So between these two, A is going to be your winner. This is something you see not infrequently on the GMAT. Correct answers where the ambiguity is acceptable, and a wrong answer where maybe they clear up the ambiguity, but there's some other error that's much, much more severe. All right, let's give you one more example, stylized example, shortened version of an official question. And then after that, we'll move into full official questions. But if you're still thinking about it, feel free to hit the pause button as always. Okay, again, nice short version, stripped it down to two answer choices. Consumers may not think of household cleaning products as hazardous substances, but many of them can be harmful to health. Part of why I picked this one is a very, very easy blind spot to develop when you're doing sentence correction is that you don't pay enough attention to the non-underlined portion. Kind of our instinct is to say, oh, let me focus on the underlined part and look at the differences. Cool, good. Don't neglect any keywords that appear in the underlined portion. So the key to this one is the word them should always jump up off the page at you. Don't care whether it's underlined or not. All those pronouns should always leap off the page at you. I should think, all right, what does them refer back to? Well, substances, cleaning products, consumers. It's ambiguous. Do I think it's a huge problem? Honestly, I don't. Pretty sure that it's the cleaning products or the hazardous substances, which are the same thing here. So is this okay? I think it's okay. I'm not crossing A out right away. Like, it's ambiguous, but not a big deal. So it's not necessarily certainly not any worse than in that last example with the pine tree. But then if I'm given the choice between A and B, what changes? Not a whole lot. Actually, nothing, except that we change consumers to a consumer. So what does that do for us? Well, it completely wipes out the ambiguity. So we go from saying them can be harmful to health, could be consumers, could be cleaning products, could be hazardous substances in theory. So maybe we're saying that consumers can be harmful to health. Obviously, that's illogical. A consumer may not think of household cleaning products as hazardous substances, but many of them can be harmful to health. Now, it can't be consumer and B. It's got to be the cleaning products. So B cleans up that ambiguity. So given the choice, given the fact that nothing else changes as a tiebreaker, yeah, I'm picking B here without a doubt. Okay, so what's my point? Be really careful with ambiguity. It is relevant. It matters. Sometimes it will be a deciding factor. Don't react to it too harshly at first. So I wouldn't cross out A because of the ambiguity, just like I wouldn't have crossed out A in that previous example with the pine trees. But what I do want you to do is say, okay, I'm noticing that there might be an issue there. I'm going to hang on to this one and look for other issues. And if all four of the other answer choices have worse issues than the ambiguity, then great, this might be my right answer. In this particular example, that ambiguity is cleared up, and that answer choice that clears up the ambiguity has no other issues with it. So in this case, B is correct and A is not your winner. Okay, with that, gonna get us some full, rich, nice, gory official examples in a moment, moderately difficult ones. You might hear other quote unquote rules when it comes to these pronouns. So I hear people say things like, well, you can't have two instances of the word it in a sentence when they refer to two different referents. Or you might hear, oh, well, you can't have a subject pronoun referring back to a possessive noun. There's all kinds of variants of that. And I don't want you to worry about those two particular examples, but there are all kinds of things out there floating around on the internet saying, oh, well, here's a rule for pronouns. Sorry, guys, there aren't any other rules for pronouns. Your job is to, whenever you see a pronoun, whenever you see it, they, or any derivatives of them, he, she, I want you to think, hey, is there something in the vicinity that this pronoun could refer back to that agrees in number? So I've got a plural pronoun. Where's my plural nouns? Look for those plural nouns. If something in the vicinity makes sense, you don't have an absolute error. If there's multiple things in the vicinity, you might have ambiguity. Pay attention to it. Don't overreact. All of these other extra rules that are out there, don't overthink them. They're probably going to do you more harm than good. They're not actual rules. One of the great things or terrible things, depending on your point of view, of sentence correction on the GMAT and EA is that there are almost no rules that universally 100% apply. So just keep your brain clear and just say, hey, as long as there's something in the vicinity that makes sense, I'm probably okay on my first pass. I don't want to eliminate it right away. On your second pass, if it turns out that something clears up an ambiguity or seems clearer because of some other reason, fantastic. But don't worry about that whole universe of all these other things that people spout on the internet. You don't need any of that stuff. Just look for something that makes sense. That's your job. Notice ambiguity. Don't overreact to it. All right, with that, two examples where you get to kind of see these in action and in a messier question where it becomes a little bit harder to sort of pick out what's going on. Give you a couple of minutes on this next guy. All right, this one's pretty tough. You need another minute or two. Feel free to take it. Hit that pause button. Okay, so this is about as messy as a pronoun question gets in some ways. We're dealing with all kinds of issues here of meaning kind of connecting with the mechanics of it. Starfish with anywhere from 5 to 8 arms have a strong regenerative ability, and if one arm is lost, it quickly replaces it, sometimes by the animal overcompensating and growing an extra 1 or 2. Okay, so hopefully those its are jumping off the page at you since you're halfway through a pronoun video. So when I see the word it, I'm thinking, all right, where's my singular? Well, arm. What else do I have? Regenerative ability, I suppose, would be the other it, but okay, we've got arm. What about starfish? So fish or starfish could be singular or plural. But how do I know that it's plural here? GMAT's always going to give you a hint. So if you get a noun that is potentially ambiguous in terms of whether the noun itself is singular or plural, so think about deer or media or data is something that some people use as singular, some people use as plural. Fish, starfish. GMAT's always going to tell you whether it's singular or plural. Starfish have. That's not underlined. Starfish is plural here, right? So we're saying starfish, plural, have a regenerative capacity. Great. What does that tell me? Well, now the it can't refer to the starfish. It's got to refer to the arm, or I suppose the regenerative ability. So let's think about that. So if one arm is lost, it quickly replaces it. So this it would refer to arm. That makes perfect sense. No problem there. It quickly replaces the arm. But we've got a problem with this first it. So logically, this has to be the starfish, right? What's replacing the arm? It's not the regenerative ability replacing the arm. It's the starfish itself replacing the arm, but it can't refer to starfish, and starfish is plural. So for that reason, A is out. We've got a singular referring to something that needs to be plural or something that is plural. So A is out for that reason. What about B? One arm is lost. It is quickly replaced. Well, it's referring to the arm. Does that make sense? Sure. One arm is lost. The arm is quickly replaced, with the animal sometimes compensating and growing some extra arms. Hang on to B. No issue there with the pronoun. C, they lose one arm and they quickly replace it. This gets awfully subtle because you could look at this and go, well, they refers to the starfish. No big deal. It refers to the arm. Not a problem. So those make sense superficially. But then when you think about the meaning, what is this really saying? When they, the starfish plural, collectively, the starfish lose one arm. Well, that doesn't make sense. An individual starfish would lose one arm, but it wouldn't make sense to say that starfish collectively, all of them, lose one arm, and they collectively replace that one arm. So really, really subtle. It's not to say that the they doesn't agree with starfish. It does from a mechanical standpoint, but it doesn't actually make sense logically when you string that whole sentence together, because what we're saying is the starfish collectively lose one arm and then they collectively replace that one arm. That doesn't make any sense. Really, really subtle. But as you get into the tougher questions on the GMAT, these tougher pronoun questions, it becomes less about the mechanics itself, and it becomes more about that intersection of mechanics and meaning. And in this case, given that choice between B and C, one arm is lost, the arm is quickly replaced. We don't even have to worry about all that business with the they. C doesn't quite make sense because we're suggesting that the starfish collectively lose a single arm and then replace that single arm collectively. What about D? They lose one arm. They are quickly replaced. We could argue that we have that same problem at the beginning. They, the starfish, collectively lose a single arm. But then we have a huge problem with this they. You can be pretty mechanical with this one and say, what does they refer to? Obviously, starfish. The starfish are quickly replaced. They can't refer to arm, that's singular. So we're saying that when starfish collectively lose a single arm, the starfish themselves are replaced. That's nonsense. D is out. What about E? Not so bad. It sounds a little bit better, I think, than some of the others here. But again, they lose one arm. We've got that same issue. They collectively losing a single arm. Sure, they replace that single arm. That it is okay. But we've got that same nonsense. They collectively lose one single arm. So given the choice between B and E, pretty subtle, but B is going to be our winner. We don't have that kind of illogical statement that the starfish collectively are losing a single arm. All right, good times. This next one I think is maybe just a hair easier, still fairly difficult. Give you a couple minutes on this one. All right, feel free to hit the pause button as always if you need a couple more minutes with this one. Okay, one of my favorite pronoun questions, because I think it really cuts to the heart of what the GMAT loves to do on pronoun questions, which is it's not really about the mechanics. There's not a ton of rules that are going to be useful for you. Instead, you need to think really, really carefully about meaning. First and foremost, obviously, those pronouns need to jump off the page at you. So nobody knows exactly how many languages there are in the world, partly because of the difficulty of distinguishing between a language and the sublanguages or dialects found within it. Hopefully that it is leaping off the page at you. What can it refer to here? Well, it's not dialects, it's not sublanguages. It's got to be a language. Well, let's think about that a little bit. We're talking about the difficulty of distinguishing between a language and the sublanguages or dialects within that singular language. Makes sense, right? That seems pretty good. I'm going to hang on to A for now. What about B? Now we've got a them instead. So the difficulty of distinguishing between a language and the sublanguages or dialects within them. Well, what could the them refer to? Could be dialects or sublanguages. Neither of those make sense, right? We're not saying that we're trying to distinguish between a language and the dialects or sublanguages within the sublanguages and dialects. So the dialects don't have more dialects within them. It's dialects within the language. Now, if you want to argue that this is reaching all the way back to languages, fair enough, a little bit dodgy, but let's think about the meaning there. Are we trying to distinguish between a language and the sublanguages or dialects within all of the languages or within that original language? What's the challenge? The challenge that's at the heart of the meaning of this particular sentence is that's the struggle is trying to distinguish between a language and all of that language's own subdialects and sublanguages. So the them doesn't make sense here. Once again, really, really subtle. It crystal clear. We're distinguishing between the original language and the sublanguages and dialects within that one language versus distinguishing between a language and all of the sublanguages and dialects within multiple languages. The latter doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For that reason, you can get rid of B. What about C? When the sublanguages or dialects within it? Great. We have that same it as we had in A. So far, so good. We have a second it. What about this one? What are we counting? Tried counting it. Tried counting a singular language. That doesn't make any sense. We're counting multiple languages. If we're counting something, it has to be something plural that we're counting. Doesn't make sense to say counting one language. So C is out. D, or the sublanguages or dialects within them. And we've got another them here. Tried to count them meaning the languages. That I can live with. But what about that them? Same exact problem as in B. We're going to say the same exact problem in E as well. We can split hairs over other things in D and E, but just to focus exclusively on the pronouns here, little bit of that same subtle meaning problem. We're not distinguishing between a language and the sublanguages or dialects within multiple languages. The challenge is to distinguish between a language and its own sublanguages and dialects. So for that reason, we can get rid of D and E, and our answer here is A. All right, that wraps us up for this one. One more video coming up on pronouns. If you're curious about, they're called demonstrative pronouns. If you like the jargon, that and those, they work somewhat similarly to it and they. A little bit of differences. That's going to be in the next video. So once again, when you're working with pronouns, key number one, make sure that the it, they, them, their, he, she, any of those basic pronouns jump off the page. A lot of the time, they're going to get you really nice, clean eliminations. If there's nothing for those to refer back to, obviously have a problem. Remember, ambiguity, not an absolute rule. If you run into other so-called rules for pronouns on the internet, chances are they are not absolute rules. There's very, very, very few of those on the GMAT. And as much as anything, the real challenge is to get into the harder questions. It's making sure you match up the pronouns to meaning. And there's really no getting away from the fact that you have to concentrate hard sometimes on the context and meaning of a sentence. Not a ton of fun, but as you get better and better at sentence correction, that's going to become easier for you, I promise. All right. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. And we'll see you next time.